Thank you. Is this on? You guys hear me okay? All right. So it's hard to compete with a fiery hot object of desire, but I'll do my best. So when you think of WebRTC, when somebody says this, what does that bring to mind? What do you think of? You're ruining my talk. Hold on, I'm getting there. Yeah, I mean, there's all these things that come to mind. You've probably heard a lot about it recently. I mean, is it just a bunch of hype? Is it really something that's not ready to use yet? Is it just like WebSockets reinvented again? I mean, really, what's the big deal? So come to find out, the culmination of WebRTC has actually been achieved in, as Angelina pointed out, chat.meetspaces. It's for making animated GIFs. No. You should check that out, though. It's really hilarious. But, I mean, really, what's the big deal here? I mean, it's just another new web technology, right? We've heard lots of new things. And as usually happens when a new technology hits the web, corporate America gets really excited and puts on an expo. Which is why we're going to be going to the Typed Array Expo of 2013, followed shortly thereafter by the Flexbox Expo of 2013. But the weird thing is, obviously, that's not real. But the weird thing is that's exactly what's happening with WebRTC. Next week in Santa Clara, California, is a giant corporate event that I will show you, if this works. And they have dinosaurs. Ah, come on, I had it loaded. The website really just sets the tone for what sort of event this is. Instead of waiting for this, you should just go to WebRTCExpo.com and see it for yourself. It's quite a sight to behold. The point is, like, there's a pile of giant corporate sponsors, all the big telecoms, you know, your Ericssons, your AT&Ts, etc., Oracle, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, out of this crowd, I would venture to say, you know, the people that are going to that event, maybe like a couple of them have written JavaScript. So, I mean, what's the big deal? I mean, they're obviously getting, this is clearly something that's kind of unique with WebRTC. So something unique is going on. And let's just kind of sort this out a little bit. So, you know, what is WebRTC really, if we break it down, right? So WebRTC, at its core, is really one thing. This is a JavaScript conference, after all, so let's talk JavaScript. It's a peer connection. So this is the object you instantiate when you want to create a connection to another peer. Operative word here being peer. So we already have WebSockets, right? So a WebSocket is a bidirectional communication channel between a server and a client. The fundamental difference here, WebRTC is a bidirectional communication channel between a peer and another peer. So once you've established a connection, you're actually sending data directly from one browser to another browser. So that means if you have Chrome on one end and Firefox on the other, they have to directly interoperate. We're not just talking like, you know, loosely adhering to some same standard. Like, they have to be able to talk to each other. And this is a kind of a first as far as what the web is concerned, in terms of the native web stack. So what it is actually is it's low-latency peer-to-peer networking that's now just part of your native web stack. So here we are, you know, Cascadia, like, why would we care? Like, what's cool, right? Okay. But the same reason we care about all new web technology. We can use it to build stuff. That's cool. So what sorts of things can you do? And I want to let this next slide just sink in for just a second. Not this one. The one after that. So let's talk audio video first, but I want to let this sink in for a second. You can actually build a telecom in your browser with JavaScript. Like, seriously, like, you can build something that used to require millions of dollars of hardware, you know, pulling cables, blah, blah, blah. Now you can sit, open a text editor, and write a friggin' telephone service. Like, that's amazing. And it's super inexpensive to operate. So once you've actually established a connection between two peers, like, you're not as a provider of this service, you're not actually having to, like, supply a bunch of bandwidth, etc. Like, it's just going from their internet connections, and it's super cheap. So that's what we did. We built an app called Talkie.io. Some of you have seen this. It's actually kind of hard to explain because it's so stupidly simple. Like, people don't get how simple it is. The way it works is you go to Talkie.io/anything, just put a string in there, and then anybody else who's on that same URL at the same time is in the same conversation. There's no downloads, there's no plugins, there's no signups, there's no registration, there's nothing. And it doesn't matter if it's one person, or you can, you know, scale it up to as far as your bandwidth can handle, which is typically like, you know, 3 or 4 is about comfortable. I mean, this is amazing. So like this isn't some sort of like someday WebRTC will descend on us and provide us this capability. Like this is actually the tool that my kids use to talk to my parents who live in Sweden. Like every weekend, we like hang out. I just put it in full screen mode on my laptop, put it on the floor, and they like hang out with their grandparents. And the quality is amazing. And you know, occasionally because they know where we're, you know, what URL we're at. Occasionally, my brother from California and his wife will just kind of hop on and join our conversation. So this stuff, you know, it's very okay. So one little more detail here. So these are actual calls connected on Talkie.io. It's not like crazy impressive numbers, but you know, the trend here is pretty obvious. You can see a few spikes from you know, getting mentioned on Hacker News or what have you. But the general trend is certainly like people are starting to realize that this isn't just messing around. Like this is legit. Like you can do this stuff. So the point is this is real. This is now. This isn't like some theoretical thing, right? So you can do video. You can do just video. You can do audio, or you can do both. And if you're in Chrome, at the moment you have to turn on a flag to do this, but you can actually do screen sharing as well. So you know, if you add, you know, video conferencing capabilities to a browser, of course everyone's going to build a video conferencing service. Like, it's kind of obvious, right? But there's plenty of other things that you can do with this. For example, surveillance systems. You could like put a webcam at your front door and like process the incoming data and, I don't know, have it like notify you or something. You could have, somebody actually wrote a WebRTC powered baby monitor. Cool, right? You can use it to control an electron microscope. This is not theoretical. This is somebody from Portland State University actually used simple WebRTC, my library, to make a remotely controlled electron microscope and be able to like show it to people at other campuses and stuff. In addition to being able to control the microscope and zoom in and see things, like his lab partner who was at the microscope there was able to kind of walk us through things and explain things as well. So just these are really cool things, right? When you become a rock star from using the synthesizer in the previous example, and you have an assistant, you can, you know, write an intercom system. You can push a button and be like, "I thirst," and water will appear. This is kind of a new concept. So the absolute minimal cost of operation makes things possible that you don't normally think of, maybe. So one of the things that we're working on doing at AT&T is basically giving a conference room a URL, right? So somebody who's, you know, we have people on our team working remotely, and if we say, oh, we're going to meet in this conference room, people that are at the office obviously just go to the conference room. But, you know, people who are not could just show up at this URL, and there they are, just as if they're kind of meeting with us, right? Basically, any sort of distributed team collaboration. Here's an interesting one. So the way that the API works is you request access to a media stream from a user. So you ask for their video camera, their audio, etc. What you get back is this media stream. This media stream object you can attach to a peer connection. So that's how you share it, right? So you establish your peer connection, and you have this media stream, and you attach it, and then the other person gets this media stream. So the cool thing is, if I have two peer connections open, and I got a remote media stream, I can actually take that and pass it to the next person. So now you're actually doing peer replicated broadcasts, which, you know, it sounds kind of nerdy, but it's freaking amazing. Like, think about this. You could actually have somebody with an Android phone that's capable of doing WebRTC, which many of you probably are holding in your hands right now. And you could, in theory, turn that person into essentially a TV broadcaster. Like, this functionality is still a little bit new, and, you know, it's still kind of shaky, more canary type stuff at the moment. But you know, in theory, you should be able to tweet a link someday, and all of a sudden you're, you know, through the power of peer replication, you could build a system that would make you a TV broadcaster. And also, my friend Brian Brennan works at Mozilla, is working on like doing like a pirate radio station this way, using this as a broadcasting mechanism. And this is important as well. Like this isn't like crappy quality. Like this is actually really good. Like if you're used to using Skype and you switch to using Talkie and you get a full screen video, it's like, wow, I can do this. Like the audio quality and the video quality tends to be really good. So I can guarantee you that the folks meeting in Santa Clara next week are not really meeting about data channels. They're talking about, you know, basically telecommunications and applying this to that space. But there's also plenty of other things that you could do with data channels. So they're a little bit more half-baked than the audio-video stuff, just because I think there's more money and it's a better demo to do audio-video. but it's really cool. So what sorts of things can you do with the data channels? File transfers? Sure. So there's a site called sharefast.me that basically they give you like a little drop zone. You take a file from your desktop, you drag it on and drop it on there, and then they produce a URL. That URL, if you share it with somebody, they will just instantly download that file. And it's not going through, it's not being uploaded to a server, it's pulling from you directly. And the way it works is if there's more people on it, there's more people then seeding that file, etc. Really cool. Kind of solves that age-old problem of like, we're in the same room, on the same network, I have a Mac, you have a PC, I'm going to give you a file, and we don't have a thumb drive. Like, it seems like that should be a solved problem, and this basically solves it. Couldn't you, in theory, then build some sort of web-based BitTorrent? Sure. So my buddy Faraz is working on that right now, actually. You should check this out. It's still pretty fresh, but he's basically trying to do this. Very cool. So you could build, in theory, a peer-seeded CDN, right? So the concept being, if I have a static site that's serving a bunch of multimedia content that might, have a few visitors now and then, all of a sudden I'm on Reddit and I'm getting pounded. Now, every person who's coming to that site is then downloading that media file from my server, and I'm having to pay for bandwidth for that. But you have a whole group of people there in WebRTC capable browsers that are showing up to get the same file. Well, they could actually send it to each other. So again, same guy, Faraz. You should follow him on Twitter if you're into any of this stuff. But he built this, peercdn.com. Really cool demos. But you can actually then, the swarm of people that show up to your site to see your content and actually share it amongst each other instead of costing you loads and bandwidth. So we've seen Brendan Knight going around doing all these amazing demos of ASM.js and all these multiplayer game type scenarios or 3D first-person shooters. In order to make multi-person like games in the browser really viable, you need a good way to send a bunch of kind of peer location information. It needs to be fast. It needs to be low latency. You're not talking about huge volumes of data, but in compared to voice or something. But so again, you can do this. There's a banana bread demo on Mozilla Hacks where they're doing just that. First-person shooter and then sending information through data channels. The point is not to give an exhaustive list here. One of the things that Carter suggested is that we kind of stay out of the stuff that you can just go read documentation about. Really help you, kind of people think about the sorts of things you can do. And that's really the point. I mean, you guys are brilliant people here. There's amazing things that we can do, and these are just new capabilities that we have at our disposal. I'm fortunate enough to work at a company called ANDYET. The thing that keeps the lights on and pays everyone's salaries is consulting work. But we also spend an inordinate amount of time building software that we believe should exist, even without a clear business purpose. And so, to give a little background on our team, much of the technical kind of roots of our team actually come out of the XMPP world. If you're not familiar with XMPP, it's essentially the chat protocol that runs most chat services that you're actually using. Things like Google Talk, PlayStations, the Leapfrogs, all kinds of things that where you're doing some sort of chat or communication, very likely has WebRTC under the hood. In fact, stuff like FaceTime very likely is using WebRTC, but they wouldn't tell us that. But at its core, the thing that WebRTC or that XMPP is really, really good at is actually federated communication. So what do I mean by that? So a phone system is a form of federated communication. If I have, my AT&T phone and you have a Verizon phone, I don't have to go, hey, what's your phone number? Oh, are you also on AT&T so I can call you? Like, of course. Like, if you couldn't call somebody on another network, that'd be ridiculous, right? So let me ask you this. I mean, who are the next generation of telecoms? If you're thinking about kind of Telefonica and Rogers and AT&T, Verizon, et cetera, you're not quite, I don't think you're seeing it. What it actually is it's Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Apple. Think about the moves they've made in the last few years. Facebook really pushing Facebook Messenger, and you can actually call people through a Facebook iOS app. At least, I actually have never tried that, but I've been told you can do it. Hangouts, Google is pushing Hangouts heavily now, and they're starting to use it. It started out as a very casual sort of like, hey, look, I'm wearing my glasses thing. But what they're actually going to be doing is and you're seeing this show up in Calendar, and if you're a business apps user for their stuff, They're starting to push that. Microsoft bought Skype. Interesting move. FaceTime, obviously, is Apple's thing. So these are the future telecoms. Like the existing telecom providers, in terms of traditional what they're providing you, they're very likely going to be your service providers in terms of they're giving you access to the network. Also, what the heck is this? FaceTime voice? Like, that doesn't even make sense. But the point is, Apple in iOS 7 is actually offering this as an alternative when you go to call somebody now. Like, you pull up your phone, and I go, I want to talk to Adam. I push a button, like, oh, he's an Apple user. I can also call him with FaceTime voice. They're starting to slowly eat away at this market, right? And here's the kicker. None of them federate with each other. Like, none of them. And that's silly. Like, if I consider my identity to be strongly tied with Facebook, which I don't, but say that's my online me, right? Like, that's what I use all the time. Like, the more and more my identity gets wrapped up into that, I want people to just reach me there. And so the fact that you have this whole swath of friends that may not be into Facebook, that all of a sudden you can't really communicate with in the way that you want to, like, that's ridiculous. And the only reason it's happening is because nobody is really seeing this as a telecom type problem. If I started a new phone network today that said you could only call people on my network, people would be like, what? And they try to say that they're very different services, et cetera, et cetera. The technologies to solve these problems exist. It's just that no one's demanding it, right? So we started thinking, what could we do? We've got all these pieces, right? We've got WebRTC, we've got XMPP, and there's something called Jingle that is basically a standardized solution to do kind of the WebRTC signaling stuff. So couldn't we just build a web-based federated alternative to something like Skype, where I can log in with my server and someone else can log in with their server and we can have a conversation, right? So we did. Lance on our team has done amazing work building an app called OTalk, and it's at otalk.im. I recommend checking it out. It's still it's still a little rough as far as the UI goes, but we're definitely going to make this like our primary communication channel. And the point is, like, this, because it's built on standards, because the whole thing is open sourced, and you can run your own version of this on your own server, and just talk to anybody else who's using these same protocols, and it will just work. The libraries that make this possible, XMPP, the thing that you always hear people complaining about in the JavaScript land is like, oh, it's XML, I hate XML. Well, Stans.io completely makes it so you don't have to deal with XML at all. It just uses all the semantics of XMPP, but lets you do a direct kind of XMPP connection in the browser without actually having to think about the fact that it's XML. And then Jingle, which is a JavaScript implementation that translates the SDP package that you get from WebRTC into something that's standard. And the point I really want to drive home is, like, WebRTC is here. Like, this isn't some theoretical thing that we'll be able to do someday. And this is kind of a call to action in some ways. There's a lot of kind of muddy, fuzzy parts and messy stuff in WebRTC at the moment. It's still kind of fresh. But it needs, like, the influence of people in this room to really help make it awesome. I believe that whenever new technology comes out, the rate of adoption is very highly proportionate to how easy it is to tinker with. Personally, for me, I would not be into JavaScript if it were not for jQuery. It was kind of the hook that got me into it. So jQuery did this for the DOM. Socket.io did that for WebSockets. Arduino did that for hardware. And hopefully something like Simple WebRTC will do that for WebRTC. I don't care what it is. That's the one I wrote. So Simple WebRTC it's becoming surprisingly popular, at least surprisingly to me. It's got about 1,000 stars on GitHub, but it makes it really easy to, like, create basically what we're doing in Talkie, right? So you just instantiate this new object. You say, I want my local video to go here. I want my remote video to go over here, and then just ask for media right away. And then when it's ready, all you have to do is call join room. So if people in this room, if two people ran this exact code, including joining the same room name, they would just be in a conversation right now without having to do anything else. And again, pulling away the complexity, making it simple enough to be approachable is huge. So check it out. It's really it's a whole collection of little tiny modules. Like, very unlikely that you're going to build the exact same thing that a bunch of people are already doing, but it has a bunch of little pieces that you can pull out, hopefully, that solve individual problems. There's alternatives. So PeerJS is a cool one. They're focused heavily on doing the data side stuff very easily. OpenTalk, there's commercial platforms that do this kind of stuff. And this guy, if you go to this URL here, he's done a bunch of cool experiments with recording and all kinds of stuff. But I encourage you to get involved. Give feedback to browser vendors. They're actively looking for people who are good developers to get in there and actually provide feedback, file bugs, improve APIs, and help push for interoperability. We set up this little site to kind of help you help track the progress of current implementations called Is WebRTC Ready Yet? The site itself is open source, and the information changes rapidly, so help us keep it up to date. You might look at this and be like, man, there's a lot of red. I'm just going to wait. But there's crazy fast progress going on in this field. The first time we heard about WebRTC was from Chris Blizzard at the very first Real-Time Conf, back when it was called the Keeping It Real-Time Conference. And Chris had this talk where he explained kind of this theoretical idea, this thing that they were kind of working on. November 2011. Then a couple months later, we got our first inquiry from a client saying, hey, we've heard of this WebRTC thing. Is this legit? Could we use this for our stuff? Then 6 months later, we were actually building stuff for AT&T and showing internal demos to them about the stuff that you can do with WebRTC. They had this cool platform they had purchased, and they needed help actually building something out on top of it. January of this year, we helped build AT&T.js, and they showed it off at CES. What it is it basically lets you it's a simple library for making calls, actually making and receiving actual phone calls from real phone numbers to your browser. So you can basically authenticate and then receive an actual phone call. Your browser will ring. You can talk to somebody who's on their cell phone. And today, so we're talking 2 years from when we first heard about it, WebRTC is very capable and available in a bazillion freaking browsers out there, right? I mean, I have no way to back that number up, but the point is, any current Firefox or Chrome browser is capable of doing this. And it's not going to, what? And mobile, so including mobile, right? So, yeah, Firefox Nightly has this. I had a screenshot from another slide at one point, but of a conversation with a Chrome beta mobile, Firefox mobile, and then Firefox and Chrome desktop side by side, all in the same conversation. And this stuff works now. So crazy fast progress. I'm going to kind of put this out there, and it's kind of a bold statement, but I personally believe that in less than 5 years, WebRTC will be the number one way people make voice calls, period. Given the rate of growth and the cost of operating these systems, and the just broad availability of this stuff out there, this, to me, seems completely inevitable. So please, please, please get involved. Help this stuff make this happen. As far as Skype taking 30%, sure, that's awesome. That shows there's interest in this, solving this problem. There's a lot more we can do with it than what Skype is on their closed platform. So please help get in there, make WebRTC awesome. Thank you.